Dawn's secret has been discovered by Dusk, forcing him to escape. The Invictus has made the jump, bringing Salvor back to Terminus to discover what secrets lie in the vault. Welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I will be talking about the 9th episode of the hit Apple TV show, Foundation. So spoilers ahead. And we're not trying to keep any secrets from you, so hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that bell for notifications and you can see all of our dirty secrets. And with that, Sterling, 9th episode in, we have one episode left. I feel like this episode was there was a lot to it, but it wasn't as in-depth as other episodes. There wasn't a lot of hidden meanings. We hear Gaal talking again, and she talks about how history is left to whoever writes it. Whoever writes about history is kind of in control of history. And even at one point, Gaal says that this is my story. I can choose what's in it, what's taken out. Does that mean Gale's an unreliable narrator? Is she unreliable telling this story?
Yeah, that's kind of what I felt like it possibly hinted at, which is interesting. It kind of makes me wonder what the truth is behind this. I also thought it was a pretty big difference from when Gaal was originally telling the people that are choosing what's going to be in the Foundation and what's not. She was the one who was cautioning that there are so many societies. How do you choose what stuff you put in from what societies? And are you biased just based off of where you came from? So it's a bit of a 180 of seeing her cautioning that and then kind of potentially rewriting history. But that's a pretty serious topic. This is something that we deal with here and now in our society, where there are, some areas where the school history books or science books are being rewritten and things are being taken out and, or things are being put in. And that has a vast impact on the people that grow up with that knowledge.
Right. I think, Synax also showed that that's kind of what they were doing. They got in charge and they were able to rewrite the history, and they condemned a lot of where history was recorded, libraries, schools.
There are history books that are having Black history that's being removed from some textbooks, or there's asterisks put into science books about this is just a theory, but also there's this other theory, and it's the winners get to choose that.
Yeah, and if you look at places like North Korea, where they have a very strict, what they can learn, what they can take in, it and just what their view on the world is from having, that kind of knowledge. And same with us, our history books, like you were saying, a lot of Black history has been erased, and it has been talked about with, just slavery in general, or even how the Civil War was fought. It was based on states' rights versus if it was based on owning slaves. So
right,
it's how you read the history, who writes the history.
Right. And it's, while they don't necessarily kind of explicitly point this out, I do think that you do see kind of what you're talking about with, maybe not necessarily as bad as North Korea, but on a larger level, when you look at the Empire's history and the story that they tell, in particular when you look at the wall that Dusk has to maintain, I think that story has been very washed and is very much from the perspective of Empire. There's a battle that's depicted on there, and it's depicted from the side of Empire, where they're bringing their greatness to these peoples. But if you remember, the Anacreans, when they were like looking at that section, were kind of whispering and talking to themselves, and it seemed like they had a very different perception of that history and a very different view of what that meant. You know, like it was empire forcing their thoughts, like conquering their people and forcing empire's thoughts on their people versus like empire bringing culture or something along those lines.
Well, yeah, and we saw in this episode with his mural where he talks to Dawn about how he brought the justice upon the Anacreans and the Thespins. And he's like, look, I did this. It was so amazing and so benevolent. And like, this is my mark on the mural. But like, we get Salvor's dad's perspective on it when he's talking to Salvor about it. And he's like, well, you know, they blew up the bridge. He blew up them. And who won? Nobody. Like, and now we're in a worse pickle because of it.
Right. I actually really liked his quote. I don't know if I necessarily agreed with it. You know, the violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I think that can be a general rule of thumb. I do think that there have been some situations where people have been in such a dire situation that maybe violence is the only way of being heard or enacting some kind of change. But I still kind of think that's like a good rule of thumb. You know,
Yeah.
that like rather than looking for better methods, that's like the last act. To some extent, it's saying like that it being the last refuge. It's like that person didn't want to do it; they were driven to it. This is like their last option.
Right. And I feel like, you know, the problem with violence in general, like, you know, violence begets violence. So, like, I agree that it is kind of like the last move of the incompetent, but, like, is it going to create more violence, you know, moving forward?
Right. Right. It's like unless that violence is checkmate level, it's it rarely is fine. Like, you know, as awful as it is, I think one of the few kind of like checkmates was like the dropping of the atomic bomb, you know, as being something that was such a show of force of like we can destroy your country. And it was a horrible act. I'm not trying to glorify it. Like that's kind of the level that you have to get to in order for it to not just beget more violence, you know. And it's like who wants that? Like that's I think that's been a stain on our history for quite some time, and something that's been horrifying that, you know, another people have had to live with for such a long period of time. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that I feel like Day was moving towards something more diplomatic. I think that his experience of not getting a vision might have unfortunately cut that journey short. And it's possible that he, you know, thinks that like the stick is the best method. And I kind of unfortunately feel like in this episode that Dawn might have learned the same thing. I feel like we were getting to a point where I was really thinking that like Dawn was going to break the mold and be somebody very different. And I feel like his one opportunity to try to be himself, he learned a terrible lesson, which I think is possibly we'll see what the next episode and the next season does. But I kind of feel like that's the type of thing that might make him think like, oh, you know what? Screw these people. The stick is the option.
Maybe I do have a theory about Dawn and Day.
Okay.
Here's my theory. Okay, so we have a triple rug pull, which was so great. I was very much not expecting, you know, we see, you know, going back to the checkmate, a checkmate that Dusk got Dawn in by making him acknowledge that he was colorblind. And so, first thing you think he's going to get busted by Dusk. He's in trouble right before he can escape. Then he escapes. You feel good. You're like, everything is right. Dawn's going to get out of there. He gets the nanobots switching to find that he's, there. So, like, you're like, oh, shit. He's in trouble now. He's with the bad guys. Then the third rug pull, Dusk comes in, saves him. Crazy rug pull. I was not expecting any of them, and I was stoked with all of them. But my theory.
Okay.
Dusk says to Dawn, you're fine, but you are broken, so you can't, I don't want to look at your disgusting face anymore. And he's like, well, it's your face, but whatever. They've only made me left-handed and colorblind, but it's your face, whatever. But Dave...
Which, by the way, is always a great comeback. I don't want to look at your face. It's your face.
Same face.
It's...
But Day... So Dawn says to Dusk, like, please, look upon me, forgive me. It's not your decision, it's Day's decision.
Right.
And I could see Day using Dusk to appease Luminism, or Dawn, rather.
Yeah.
To appease Luminism, to be like, look, we don't have a full genetic dynasty anymore. We have a variant. He is different, and he is going to be the next empire. Or he's going to be the next Day. So I do think they might save him. They might save him.
I could see that. I could definitely see that. So we'll kind of see going forward.
There are some things I did not like in this episode.
Ruh-roh.
Talk to me. I just feel like for a show that is so dedicated to certain things, like that will get certain details right, I just feel like there was a lot of things in this episode that, I don't know. Gail talking early on, she said man invented fire, and I'm like, oh, we didn't really invent fire, we just harnessed fire. Like, we didn't invent fire, like, that's... I was like, all right, that's fine.
I mean, maybe it was like the inventing the way to be able to
create fire reliably.
Create it, and exactly, because like it is something that happens, but that's not very useful when you need to stay in a place that's cold. So I think maybe it was like more of like the invention of how to fire, this is the TP. These are like the, Lincoln log kind of.
Well, so this is my least complaint. I have other complaints about this episode. One, his running from when he was escaping, I thought looked a little silly. Like he's in the garden, and we've seen the garden several times, and we don't see like patrols patrolling the garden. So are they searching for him? And if they're searching from him, they're like 10 feet away. And there's like two groups of guards, and he looks like he's all like nervous. And then like later when he's like running, he like hides under the grate when they're right above him. But like it was like a weird dramatic hide under the grate that like he like stopped and like they didn't change their position, and then he decides to run again. And when he's running from Azura, and there's like in that bubble area, he like runs one way, sees the guy, he just goes around the bubble the same direction. Like so that looked really silly, and I was not a fan of. And then there are a couple things towards the end with like Farah and Salvor, where like they had these two Thespin gunships, and like Farah comes in and like she just destroys both gunships easily. Like I was just like, because they both shot at her and they didn't hit her gunship.
Yeah.
Like they both shot at her, it like bounced off, and then she was able to take out two instantly. Like I just seemed a little, especially when they're like ready to gun, like they were like primed and ready. Just seemed a little like, okay, we're trying to get Farah there.
got the idea of that. I didn't necessarily love the execution. In
Yeah.
my head, it was kind of like they were hesitant to really shoot it up because like it is their ship, so they didn't necessarily know that Farah had taken control, and so she kind of got the jump on them because of that. But it didn't necessarily play out to look exactly like that because, like you said, the other side did actually shoot. If they had not shot, and like
Right.
she'd come down and it seemed like, oh, you're just the third jump ship, you're late.
Right.
Why are you late? And then she shoots them.
But she comes from a distance. She shoots at the people on the ground. She does like a loop around, and like the ship shoot at her. At her back, she flips around and instantly takes down both ships. Like,
yeah,
they didn't have shields like she had. Anyway, that was one complaint, and then the last one, and then I won't complain about this episode anymore. But
it's all right.
At the end, they all point their guns at Salvor. And Salvor after she shoots Farah, she runs to in front of her mother. Like, they weren't aiming at her mom. They were aiming at Salvor, and Salvor runs, and they all turn their guns to face. Like, she put her mom in more danger. I don't know. There's just a couple things there where I was just like, it kind of pulled me out of the episode, but I think overall the episode was good.
She likes her dad more, so she was okay with putting her mom in danger.
She should have hid behind her mom then. Make it accurate then. If you're gonna like your dad more, hide behind your mom.
Going back to the very beginning of the episode, I would like to say something that they definitely got right.
Oh, yes.
Lewis redeemed himself.
Yes, you got that right. You predicted that Lewis was going to sacrifice himself.
The show needed to do that, otherwise that would have been my complaint. Is like, he is... How is he still in charge or being held as a hostage? Because like, he's not helping anybody out. He's not helping the good guys out. He's not helping the bad guys out. He's just kind of useless. I did feel like he redeemed himself, and I thought that was an interesting portrayal of, like, you could see the things going through his skull, like looking for the right neural paths, because he didn't have the operation. And so that was, both like kind of horrifying, but also looked very appropriate for kind of the way it was described.
I also liked how the jump worked, like how Salvor experienced the jump, which I also think still lends credence that she's Gale's daughter, because she could be awake during jumping. But I did like how it seemed like everything was happening in that same space, like, but different times. So like, she could see when they were coming in, when the other people were coming in. And I don't know if I saw this, but when we looked at Farah, when she was on the ground experience it, did it seem like her eye came in to existence? Like, in her black eye? Because it did look like at a couple parts, like, her eye faded in. Like, it was almost like reaching into the past of Farah. I didn't notice that. I don't know, and I couldn't tell. I was, like, trying really hard, but it's like the lights are flashing, and, like, it's kind of hard to see, so I wasn't sure if I saw her eye or if it was just, like, a light, but it did seem like I saw, like, almost like her body is traveling through time in a way.
That would be interesting. I do have some questions on the vault.
Yes.
Okay, so door-ish thing. Well, first of all, the vault's like splits in half, goes to the ground, kind of opens up, and a beam comes out, like a sky beam, and we don't see exactly what that does. And then Salvor's mom says something about, like, oh, there's a door, and then we see a blurry figure coming out, and it is Hari. And so my first kind of thought is this a teleportation device? I mean, obviously it would be more than that because it also had like the null field and possibly gave Salvor visions. But like, how did Harry get here? You know, I know that he is digital, but still, that would need to be transmitted. So that's kind of like my first thought. But then it's still there's still the question of like, where did it come from? Like, how did it get here, and or when did it come from? Because Terminus is a very unhospitable place. So they needed to settle it with a number of people, knowing that some of them would die off in order to get the infrastructure they needed to build what they needed. So it still kind of has that big question around like, where or when did it come from? Like, how did it get here? Who put it here?
I have thoughts on it.
Oh, please.
First off, Helicon, where
yeah.
Harry is from. When Gaal talks about it, it seems like the planet itself is hidden. Like, it's kind of off the Empire's radar. But, like, people know it exists. Like, people know that's Harry's home planet. But we know it exists. But if this is a hidden planet, what if Helicon has, like, either better technology because it created someone like Hari Seldon who's a genius. Maybe it's a planet full of geniuses. We know that there's a second foundation on Helicon.
Or that they need to actually put that second foundation there.
Well, when Harry's talking to Gaal, he made it sound like he'd built two foundations and we're going to that second foundation. Like, he made a secret foundation and we're going to that one. And I think that secret foundation created the vault, which I think is like you were saying, a teleporter, because I think it is a door between both foundations. And so I imagine we see that the vault can kind of do things on its own. I think the vault had always had a communication to the Raven, and that maybe from Helicon they sent the vault to Terminus and it just landed there, and that they knew it would eventually sync up. That's my thought.
Yeah. I'm definitely interested in seeing kind of how all that plays out. I do feel like with Harry being there, that they might have what they need to take over the Invictus.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, I'm very curious how they end the final episode, because to me, things are wrapping up nicely. And I think that we don't know exactly what's going on with Gaal. I think her story is a little bit on the nebulous side, but the fact that she's voicing everything over tells me that she's safe and lived long enough to see a good amount of this through, and she's referenced things we haven't seen, so I think she's going to be fine. It seems like things are clearing up on Terminus. You know, like the sides are possibly teaming up. The sides may possibly get the Invictus to be working on their side, and if that's the case, that kind of like, obviously, it doesn't resolve the larger issue of the fact that the Empire is going to fall and the Foundation needs to see humanity through this. And this is only the first crisis. But for right now, things are resolving well, at least for Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, Empire is a different thing. It definitely seems like its issues aren't necessarily over, although it's resolved its biggest problem of like this religion that was potentially going to undermine its authority. I'm curious to see if, rather than like continuing on a lot of the current threads, it seems like there's going to be new threads that are possibly going to be brought up in the next episode to build that tension and to work that storyline towards whatever's happening in season 2.
Well, I'm not sure that. Well, I know that Luminism was the biggest threat, but I do think we kind of got a tease of another big threat. Like, we found a whole organization that, and maybe they weed out the whole organization and find them, but to me it seems like this secret organization had means to change the DNA.
Yeah.
Was able to steal a clone of Cleon. So I think that organization was also behind the Skybridge attack.
Ooh.
So I'm thinking that this shadowy organization is going to play a bigger threat to Cleon's dynasty. Maybe?
Yeah, I could see that. One thing I'm definitely excited about with the next episode is we got to get more Dem, because we didn't get any of her this episode. So you can't ignore her for 2 episodes. And I'm a huge fan of Demerzel, so
yeah, we're gonna get some Demerzel payoff. Quick side note: another thing I noticed is the number 3 pops up a lot. You know, we have the 3 Cleons, we have the Maiden.
Oh, yeah.
So, Azura lived on, her building number was 33. Don't know if that's any relevance, but also at the end, we have the 3 groups coming together that is part of the Foundation. Thespin, Anacreon, and Termini. Or the 3 groups coming together. So I think 3, I don't know what it means, but there is a consistent symbolism of 3 in this show.
I'm interested in seeing if that pays off. They definitely had that shot of Exo on the globe when it came in, which means that they want us to remember that is an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really saying anything other than the fact that they are trying to make us remember. I'm wondering.
Mm-hmm.
So this show has, I feel like one of the big reveals of this show was when Gaal said, that she feels the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like it was supposed to feel like a big moment. And I don't know if it's just the fact that we watch it twice and then discuss it, but it really didn't seem like a big reveal. And at this point, as long as many kind of things that we've seen that are similar with Gaal and Salvor, I'm wondering if that's a big reveal that we're going to see at the end of this episode somehow.
I think so.
Is that supposed to feel like a reveal, or it's possible that they gave us all the pieces with the zygote in I think episode 2, and they used that information in a different way to talk about how hostile this planet or how hostile this journey is, to Begets, and the struggle that this one person is having, so that we think, oh, it's about what they showed us. It's about how harsh it is and how difficult of a decision it is for people to give that up, knowing that they may not survive, etc., etc. That whole thing, and that they think that maybe we won't have picked up on that's how they used it, and that's what it was for a different purpose. But I'm just kind of curious, was that supposed to be a big surprise?
I think so. because we are eagle-eyed fans, I think in the second episode I mentioned that seemed so, like, out of place. Like, you could have talked about the hostility of the planet. You could have talked about how
Right.
harsh the environment is without having to have the separate zygote thing of, like,
Right.
you can preserve your zygotes. And I believe in the episode, I'm like, this is weird that that they talk about this. And
Yeah.
so I think it is supposed to be a reveal. Like, only
Okay.
you and I have no. Well, I actually,
But then it's like all the similarities
yeah.
to me.
And she is like when she's trying to figure out the prism thing, she like goes into Gale's body. She went into Raish's body. Like
Right.
or
And she did that in, I think, 2 attempts, which was like the same number of attempts I think it took Gale to do that with that, like, whole prism. And I don't know, she seems like I guess she hasn't really, like, felt the future.
well,
She is different. Has she felt the future?
the coin flipping. She's like heads,
Oh,
tails,
right.
heads, tails. She's like, and if it's at a
Right.
certain point,
Yeah,
luck runs out. It's not.
So I don't know. Like, I
Unless you could interpret it as that the Foundation was always going to need somebody like Gale. Like, this could be the way to not, like, to still be surprised. Like, the Foundation would always need someone like Gale to get them through their first crisis. And so her being born, it just, like, since Gale wasn't there, she, like, was able to fill that role and, like, have the same, like, she is the same abilities as Gale, but I think it's, pretty obvious that it's her daughter.
Yeah, to me, there are so many similarities between them that it just kind of makes it seem like, how would somebody not?
Right.
But I guess there was a big time difference. They might have forgotten the zygote thing, because that might not have, like, really stood out in their memory. But for me, it feels like we're leading up to that big reveal, and
yeah.
There's like a 1% chance in my head that I'm wrong about this one.
We're just too good at what we do. We're eagle eyes. We see it, we know it,
But, like, there's some of those things where I think they are very well hidden, and I don't think that's, like, this one keeps, like, she's so different, and those differences are so similar to Gale that it just feels like, how is somebody going to not realize that? Versus, like, when you look at, like, Severance, a lot of its hidden things are fucking hidden.
Yeah.
And they're not really hammering those in. Like, I don't know if people will necessarily, with the Waffle Party, when we finally saw it, I don't know if people are going to remember that painting with the 4 tempers.
Right.
I don't know if they're going to remember when we heard Kier Egan talking about taming the 4 tempers, because when we heard that, we were watching Pete stumble through the streets. Yeah. And I think, like, you're focused on that visual thing, and you don't necessarily understand, like, the gravity of what you are hearing and the importance. Like, I literally went through that scene twice, and the second time, like, paused with the subtitles on and wrote down everything I was seeing, and then looked at the text, and it's like, holy shit, I see the connection. Right. So, like, it's all there, but it's super hidden, so I don't know if somebody would even necessarily, like, put all of those pieces together. And then, like, the sorting, like the feel, like, it's, to me, that's much less heavy-handed and is still going to be a big fucking surprise to people. Versus, I feel like even if you don't remember the zygote scene, a bunch of people are going to be like, these 2 chicks are very similar.
I do think because of her time jump, Gale, like that would make people not believe it because it's like, oh, we're watching them at the same time. They're the same age.
Right.
There's no way. So
Yeah.
and they've really tried to hammer home her and her dad's relationship, like
Right.
how
Yeah.
upset she was when he died.
Right.
Every memory she had. We had a flashback memory of them having a cute moment,
Yeah.
and I think that's what they're trying to hope that you focus on.
Right.
Like, yeah,
Okay.
she has the similar powers as Gale, but look at how close she is with her dad. Like, she's clearly not Raish's kid.
It's just like I feel like it sticks out extra because they make such a big deal about the fact that you can't be aware through jumps, otherwise it'll fuck you up. Like the only people that can are spacers who are genetically engineered, and now we've seen that both Gale and Salvor have gotten through completely unscathed. And so to me, it's almost like superpowered tier ability.
Right.
Like this isn't just like they have the same color eyes. Like
Right.
this is an anomaly. Like it seems like it should be unlikely with one person, much less with two. And so it just kind of feels like, and who knows, maybe people forgot like the zygote scene, and so in their heads they're just like thinking, how can there be two of these anomalies? What are the chances? And then when they get hit with the revelation of like they're related, then it's like, oh.
Yeah, and I mean, well, obviously, like, if you think about it, too, like, so Salvor didn't fall asleep during the jump, and she's not affected by the null field. And it's like, well, if Gale was supposed to go to this foundation, I'm assuming Gale wouldn't have been affected by the null field either.
Right.
And so that would have been Gale, like, Harry's idea of how Gale would figure out the vault is because she would be immune to it. So it's like, I mean, it does seem pretty obvious, like when you think about it.
It does. Well, and I think it's going to be revealed in the next episode. I don't think it's going to be dragged on to season 2.
Yeah, next episode for sure.
And I think it's going to be like the big reveal.
Mm-hmm. Big reveal of the season.
We'll see. I could be wrong.
Probably are.
Yeah, it's what I do.
What I do. And with that, our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining along with us. Next week, we will be finishing up Foundation with the finale, and we will let you know next week what our next show will be. So thanks for joining along with us. I'm Mark.
I'm Sterling. Thanks.
Thanks.